we'd kind of like to recap a little bit. There's a link to last month's call doc, but we ended up kind of working through a number of the topics that we had outlined. Got very close to finishing. We covered funding models, the hiring process, looking at job descriptions, job postings, interviewing, and a little bit how mentors, HR managers were assigned. So that kind of left us where we hope to pick up today, and where we had some things about onboarding. And then we also dug up some input questions that came from last month, and added a couple others, trying to round out the rest of the conversation that we wanted to hold today with everybody. So our first one, if everybody's in the call doc, is the onboarding, the HR versus department versus mentoring mentee onboarding. And really the question here boils down to what onboarding is done related to your campus HR department and or the mentor mentee. And this isn't really quite getting to the onboarding of training somebody for their position. It's a lot of maybe what you do leading up to that. So we've thrown a couple, sample answers in that were there before, related to UVU and Virginia and South Carolina. Looks like they added theirs in. So we would encourage you to add things in, but I'd kind of highlight a little bit about the answer I put in, where we, through the student program, there's an onboarding process the program does with our students. And a lot of that is to get that student oriented to the ongoings and usual business, operations that the program will oversee. The monthly sync ups that we do with a student lead, the student and the mentor, time cards, general expectations and details of just how things are going to work. To some degree, there's not a lot of onboarding related to campus facilities, just because they're already a student on the campus and there's a fair amount of a knowledge of that. So maybe the closest we do there is we introduce them to the data center. But that's more something that we do within the department, as we get them started. Let's see, I think that covers most of the bits of what I put in there. I don't know, what do others think about this,
Yeah, and Amanda, do you want to add the Purdue one?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
I can't hear my head shake.
Yeah, what are other folks thinking about this?
So I don't really have a student program. For a long time, I just had one graduate student, and we kind of have exploded this past academic year, and we've gotten some more, but we're actually hiring for a researcher's project, and we're just the mechanism by which they kind of have the requirements of a student employee kind of thing. So I'm more of a listener in this.
Yeah.
It's trying to figure out how to develop our program from that.
Well, but then maybe I'd prod you then, as you've had this explosion of people, have there been things that you've bumped into, either successes or challenges that, as you look forward or aspire to this growth ongoing, you want to kind of cover better and that still might be worth capturing here because they're good things to think about?
So it's interesting. When I first envisioned a student program, I envisioned more traditional, okay, these people are members of Research IT Services, right? And so they're junior, like our staffers or whatever, right? But it seems like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 now students who are really just under us because we understand the research activity and they're doing 100% other things, right? So I have one student who is at our campus, then he worked for Carol. He got work direction and everything from Carolyn, but I signed his time card and I was almost like the research onboarder, like, so there's the general HR onboarder, department HR, and then I was the next stage of that, and then passing the employee on to the kind of person who's gonna give them the work direction and all those pieces.
Hmm.
So it was pretty removed. Right, so, same thing, I have a data analyst student who's, we're hiring, and that's gonna be that, and then I've got 3 actually working with a faculty member.
Hmm.
And I have them because I understand compliance, FERPA and HIPAA and all those things, I understand those things, so I can help them with those pieces, privacy, all that stuff. So I'm not sure if I really am that much of a value add in this conversation.
Yeah, that could be a basis for a student program if this is something that is going to be going on and on and on. If it is not just a one-off.
Yeah, no, it's looking like this is the shape of what my program is, and the traditional student employee is really secondary to this as my emphasis of the student program.
Yeah, so I am kind of I'm exactly in the same boat. So I hire students, most of them do full stack development, and they mostly come from computer science background. Some of them have done software development after graduating, and then they go to grad school. And we view that as cheap labor. And I have a bunch of interdisciplinary projects with a lot of applications development. Most of them collect data on the edge, and we have a component where we share the output or the data with some members of the public or a group of stakeholders. So most of the time, the students do a lot of the work. Even if I'm looking into hiring seniors full stack developer, but his job will be primarily to help the student worker working on the project and doing most of the development. And so we've been having discussion, and I've actually brought in a number of faculty, some researchers as well as staff as well. So we're looking at how can we structure this in a way that it's something that is continuous. And not only have the student workers, we have the student workers, they train. It's clear that there is equally a university requirement that as they're doing what they're doing, even though they're being paid for, they can equally earn credit for that. But we want to extend it and even to a point where we can equally bring high school student or grade school student during summer for some type of internship where they interact with this graduate student and create that chain of transmission of knowledge.
Very good.
Yep.
Great feedback. As we're thinking about the next question, so this was more of like the additional questions that we found from the last meet, and so Brian and I tried to break these down into groups. We'll see how well we did. So training and roles. How do you utilize your student workers? What roles do they fulfill? Are they specific roles that you use them for? And are there roles that you are specific that you don't use them for, and why? So to kind of think about this, and Amanda, I'd really like for you to add to mine and think about if I answered this right. So for us, at least when in the Rosen Center, RCAC, we really tried to facilitate all students basically got to do just about every role, including system administration. I think there was a number of times where we would go to conferences and tell people that we would give our students pseudo access, and they were like, "You do what?" Because we really tried to implement the students as if they were full-time practitioners learning, the same kinds of things that a full-time practitioner would learn. And I think the Amanda, are there any roles that we wouldn't hire students to do that you can think of? Because at least in the data mine and Archie, we actually even use students as project managers, which I don't think we do in RCAC. But
No, but we're open to it. I
Yeah.
think we would be open to any role. We don't currently for everything, but it's not to say we wouldn't.
Yeah. And I guess, Brian, do you have are there specific roles in your organization that you're like, ooh, we just don't want students doing that? And or is that conflicting with like permissions? Because I think sometimes people think about them as the same kind of thing.
We have not included a student worker on the system side or anything systems related in our compliance environments. Because there's a few of those where you have to go and have the individual background checked and certified, and there's a little bit of an onerous process there. That doesn't mean we can't, we just haven't pushed the go button on that yet. And then with storage, because yes, Sudo is nerve-wracking, and we spend a lot of time trying to take what usually is a very energetic young personality, eager to make improvements everywhere, optimize everything, which sometimes makes you, the person watching what's happening with the keyboard, nervous that a bad command is going to be typed without meaning to. So there's a lot of weight on that, and so while we do the sudo, similar as you were describing, in certain cases, we have not included them with storage, just because of the, I don't know, there's a silly little phrase we use here relating to the HPC machines that, I can crash your computer a dozen times and say, sorry, start your job again. But the moment I lose your data, you'll never forgive me.
That's right.
And so that really kind of fits in with this. We don't want to put the student in that situation, and we don't want to be in that situation either. So it's choice, kind of that risk reward kind of evaluation, that's had us hold back on that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Because as you were saying that, we would never let our students get on our NIST machines, or like they aren't even allowed to like get into those machines. And you're probably spot on with storage. Now that you say that, like, I don't know that we would ever just let our students go wild. I think Raymond at Purdue would probably kill somebody if we let a student on.
Well, when we look at how we use them with our clusters, I call the ones that are assigned to work with me on the clusters my node wranglers, right? So they go out and chase down hardware problems on nodes. They try to triage them. They do a lot of the RMA work with the vendor, behind the server. It's easy to walk over to the storage guys and say, would you want students to help you with the same thing? They can swap disks for you and everything else. And, and as we talk down that's where that risk reward, you're kind of like, what if they pulled the wrong disk, and you're right at the edge of the cliff and that one extra disk just killed the whole file system. Well, we've done fairly well. But even within that, there are things we have learned over time with just the compute nodes. Some of them, you think your NVIDIA DGX style box, are high cost boxes. And so the risk may not be about losing data, but a mistake could be very costly kind of at the hardware side. So we do spend a lot of time trying to convey the significance of what they're working on to try to give them that more internal guidance to kind of slow it down. And I do spend a lot of time telling them it's okay to take a few extra seconds and ask yourself, am I doing what I thought I was doing in the place I thought I should do it? Waste those extra seconds because they're not a waste. I'd rather you do that and be a little bit slower and do the right thing than realize that you were not where you thought you were when you ran that command and the wrong thing happened.
Yeah. A bonus question as we're wrapping this one up to go to the next one is, does your organizations have your students work directly with faculty and staff and represent your organization? Because I know, like, for Amanda, that's a big thing for us, right? For you and Envision Center. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. And then Michael, I'd be interested in hearing from you.
So in the Envision Center, we have, I can't even tell you how many mini projects we have where students are the main developer on them. So we have regular biweekly meetings for most projects where the students are actually leading the meeting on their updates. We're on there to help them because we have found if staff isn't on, they are treated differently, unfortunately, but they run the meetings.
That's interesting. Michael, what about you?
Yeah, so I'll say, going back to the earlier comment, same thing. We don't let the students anywhere near the controlled systems, basically. It's too burdensome to get through the compliance necessary to enable that. And given that, you know, it can take 6 months, and if they work for us for a year, that's just not effective. We have students answering support tickets. That's actually one of our newer things we have students doing, but in that case, they are definitely researcher facing. We have them, in those cases, sometimes attending our office hours, but mostly to shadow and learn from us rather than being left alone with the researchers. It's a good opportunity for them to see how we work, to learn how to answer the support tickets based on what they can watch there. We do this semester, I have a student working with me who's sort of jointly hired by us and our College of Engineering. I mentioned this last time, I think, but so he's working more directly with them on course support. And so he's actually been very much involved in meetings with the professors who were designing this new curriculum effort and participating, because he's doing a lot of the research on the various options available to us. And so he's definitely presented updates and worked with them in those meetings. I see a lot of the other students work on documentation, which doesn't have them talking to the researcher directly, but the results of their work are quite visible.
Thanks.
One thing we've picked up on with what you were just saying, Michael, is on the having the users engage with tickets, or the end user, sorry, students engage with the tickets or end users, is incredibly intimidating to them. And so I would say we've had a number of successes, but not an overwhelming success with this. This is a hard role to get them to find good job satisfaction and to do well with. So you first start spending time with them, trying to encourage them to more be aware of who in the department does what, and have them almost be a ticket router where they are connecting people to the right dots, and maybe also trying to have them look at what's reported. And if the user says, you know, I can't log in, but they don't see anything more, then they reply back, hey, log into what, you know, and when, you know, and trying to get some, you know, data, you know, in there. And you encourage them to keep their name hooked to the ticket, so they see all the following conversations, so that they will kind of be exposed to what the actual problem ends up being and what the solution ends up being. And so again, there's a few that really have latched onto that and have actually become a really, you know, significant contributor to the ticket system and responding to user services. We're actually going to be reclaiming one of those in July, I think, where the former student, one of the better ones, went off, got his PhD somewhere else, and now is coming back and going to be one of our user services staff. So that's a positive story there too. But that has been really hard to have good effectiveness, because a lot of times the students just kind of don't get past the, I'm just routing this to people and making the best guess, and the best guesses are often very wrong, but you know.
Huh. Yeah. All right, good. Next question, maybe?
Sure.
Do you want to do it, or you want me to?
Sure. I'll hit on this one. This is
Okay.
Just make sure we're on the how to train, develop good mentoring skills.
Yep.
Yes. Right. So I'm just gonna go full confessional mode. One of the very first things we did with some of the students as the student program got started proved to be one of the big failing points. We were actually looking at OpenStack and OpenNebula. And we sat two students down that were exceptional students, kind of helping out on the system sides of things. And we said, we'd like you to explore this. And they're like, okay. And then for the next couple of months, this just proved to be actually completely miserable for them. They didn't know what that meant. They didn't know what to do with that. And it actually took somebody else to come in and say, well, what are you having them accomplish? And we realized how hard it was for us as the mentors to convey what we really meant by that. Even though I think it was easier for us to kind of feel that out on our own, we actually had a tough time articulating it and, you know, writing it down into pieces. So what we've evolved to now with the program is really focused on these monthly goals, trying to have bite-sized pieces that are reasonable to do over the month. And the sync up ends up helping the student and the mentor together to discuss what we accomplished in the last month, what we're setting the goals for the next month on, and giving an opportunity for this student lead that kind of oversees this sync up to ask the mentor, does this seem like an appropriate, workload for what you want? And then looking at the student, is this reasonable for you? Do excuse me, do you feel like you can be successful? And a lot of this is also trying to sneak in a little bit of the, student life and work life balance too, just making sure that we're not over asking. And you can see it in the student. They're a lot happier because they're saying, I accomplished each month with what they did last month. It's milestones, it's positive. And it's also easier for us because if you do hand off from one student to the other, you've planned it out in these little milestone chunks that you're working on, and you just transition to somebody else. That's what I would contribute to this one.
Jacob or Claire, do either of you do this kind of training for mentoring?
So I actually have a question. Is this most effective for transactional type activities with students? Because I feel like we have not really failed, but again, the vision has changed a lot for me because we have one position we started out as a graduate student domain consultant. So basically, we wanted somebody in a domain, a graduate student in a domain, to be able to then do research IT kinds of stuff, facilitator, consulting kinds of things, generally support across the entire research life cycle in the domain and, kind of domain specific. And that never quite worked out because one, a student has a limited amount of time and they're not consistent, they're not a full-time and they're not necessarily going to be there for 5 years, they're, 1, 2 years. So my question is, back to does this mainly just work for transactional kinds of things?
It's not quite as grand as what you're saying there, but in this node wrangling facet, there is just this ongoing. In fact, if I describe the node wrangler a little bit better to you, the idea of going and looking to see which nodes have a problem and what they can work on is kind of this ongoing thing. It's not something I set a specific goal for each month, other than to say we want to keep doing our node wrangling. And we try to identify an amount of their time that we're going to, at least do this in the node wrangling sense. But I try to encourage them and get them engaged in this because these are activities that for the first couple of weeks are exciting and fun, and then they can turn to the monotonous, direction at times. So we try to encourage them to make it more enjoyable by looking for ways to improve it. And then as they come up with ways, we encourage them to be part of implementing those improvements. And those turn into little mini side projects. And they end up being a product that they're creating while they're doing their kind of ever-present responsibility. So I know, I feel like that's a positive direction because you want to go and make something that's a tangible product that they're doing that you can still set goals and talk about that really is at least synergistic with the underlying need, if not more directly tied to the underlying need. With your example, I'm not sure that is a very good reference or not, because I'm not sure what the product's tangibles could be, but
we ended up having like one of our students, he became a data wrangler. So he was put on projects that was very specific, like go de-identify this data for this researcher, right? And he would go in and actually collect data out of one of our student our activity hub where there's data that is there's some privacy issues. So he de-identified, and so it was a very specific project, and he could work on that, and he could advance his personal skills in the Python scripting that he was doing and things like that, and he could get support and mentoring, I guess, guidance from somebody, a staff member on the team. But again, I'm having trouble with the longevity of a student and their actual working schedule.
So again, relating this a little bit to the program I have here, but were you interacting kind of in the triangle between the researcher, they're doing something for this student, and somebody from your staff kind of periodically having a sync up that is a touch point, where you give that researcher an opportunity to maybe out of band, or not really out of band, but it's this conversation, express if we're going where they want us to go, the student to kind of bring up their perspectives. And because I'd say our when we introduced this monthly sync up with this third person, the student lead in our case, that was significant for improving things, especially with some of the ongoing tasks.
So for that last example that I gave, that was actually a student who worked directly in the research IT team.
Mm-hmm.
And then was part of the consultation to a faculty member. So they didn't work for that. They didn't work on their project. They were just doing something for them and giving it to them, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
as opposed to being embedded in their project. So I know I'm flipping and I'm talking about two different kind of types of students. But I just don't really know how to wrap my hands around students that are actually part of our program and how to get them up to speed, because I feel like our research IT program is, because it goes across the entire research life cycle, it's not I mean, we have full-time staff facilitators who it takes them a year to get their feet under them. So how do you wrangle that kind of a thing with a student who's part-time, who's not gonna, I mean, we don't want them to be around because they're a student. That's not their job. Their job is to be a student and be enhanced by what we offer them.
We do tend to give the students very specific projects, like the ones who work on documentation, which is where we traditionally had most of our students. They're really just working on that. So they're not expected to learn everything about our entire program. They tend to pick stuff up over time, and that's part of the goal too, that they get exposure to what we're doing and can learn more about it. But they're really only expected to focus on one very specific part, because, as you said, it takes a while for them to get on board. They may work for us for 1 to 4 semesters, usually varies, say average 2 or 3. And okay, if you tried to have them do everything the full-time employees do, they would never get past the onboarding phase. I will say, and this goes back to actually one of your earlier comments, we're sort of differentiating between the undergrad and master students working for us. So traditionally, we've mostly had undergrads, and they tend to get very specific projects. They don't get as much direct exposure to the researchers. This semester, we do have 2 master students, and they're being given, in some ways, more specific projects, but ones that they're doing a bit more independently. They're expected to develop some additional expertise where they have maybe a bit more experience of taking on a project and figuring out how to approach it rather than being told exactly what to do. The undergrads, maybe we grow into that, where they start out with very specific tasks, and we try to encourage them to build up to the ability of making suggestions, of coming up with implementation plans for whatever they're working on, as it's an opportunity for them as they get more comfortable with the environment. Yeah, it is tricky. I definitely would not want to tell them, here's everything we do, because they would never get on board quickly enough. And they would, we already face that if they end up working for us for only a semester, really it's a negative return on investment for us. If they work for us for 2 years, it usually is incredibly positive. But you never know when you start how it's going to work out.
Yeah, so for me, just as Brian was saying, we do have various areas where we could use students, which is not typically like what you would consider research computing, but I would say the technology landscape, 3D printing, for example. So we have a studio that is completely, I would say we have one staff who is in charge of the studio, but most of the operation is done by the students. So I'm actually working with her to set up something that will mirror what we will call a student program. So they could be undergraduate student, they could be graduate student. The 3D printing things, this is interdisciplinary project, and some of the project will require sensors and design, printing. They will do all of that, the models and everything. So that's part of their training and that's part of their job as well. As far as I'm concerned, the student worker, so they primarily are hired by the PI. The PI hires them, but he has his area of specialty, which is not research computing. But the student then will be getting access to research computing resources, or even getting advice on what to use, cloud versus on-prem, or maybe just on-prem, and if they're using cloud resources, where do they even start? Applications development, yes, that is my job. So in that case, we will have some sort of scheduling planning where on regular basis, he will meet with the PI for the scientific component of the job. And on regular basis, he will meet with me with the research computing and applications development component of it. And there will be a joint session where we'll come in and then converge our ideas, like what is lacking, what do we need to do? Are we even communicating effectively? Do we need to improve? And then ask the student what are some of his challenges. Maybe we're giving him too much work or less work. Yeah.
Okay. Should we move to the next question?
Sure.
Okay. I think it, all right. So now we're talking more about setting up the individual for success. And how do you discover the available resources to help you address difficult situations involving performance, conduct, and breach of security issues, or issues related to physical, emotional, and mental health? And so, one of the big things that Brian and I took a pretty deep dive on this conversation, and I'm interested in hearing everyone's I guess feedback on this. But Brian and I really talked about this as being more of a you should always first start with your HR department to make sure you're doing the right legal kind of things. But then beyond that, what are the things that we can do that can help set people up for success when these situations happen? Brian, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered most of it. As soon as it becomes to kind of a health in any of the directions, it's, you're not at least I'm not a doctor. I can't speak for each of you, a medical person that can give anything other than here are the resources on campus. And so I think recognizing that boundary is important, critical, right? And your HR should be in a position to guide you on that to some degree. So, but I really feel like it's something to watch for, that this, so that you're having success with the student. The other parts of the question end up being more on performance, choices made, things like that. And I think, again, there, it feels like, does your department, have you presented something to the student, or does your department have somewhere in documentation, or even your campus kind of, general conduct kind of expectations? In our campus, like from the security perspective, there are good policies in the campus, fair use kind of things that kind of talks about what you can and what you can't do. Don't run a Bitcoin miner on your, desktop just because you can. And you want to talk with them about that, and you want to, I don't know, I have found this one to be one where I want them to feel comfortable enough to ask me something that probably isn't okay, so that I can have a comfortable conversation back and say, yeah, it's probably not. I don't want them to be terrified of me and not ask it, because then I don't know if they would actually do it and just not tell me about it. Right. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Amanda, do you want to talk a little bit about this? Because I know that we have outlined some things in the student handbook and such, but I know that your team has done a pretty good job of navigating this, especially during COVID.
Do you have your student handbook public?
I can share it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have it outlined like basically probably from our HR department on like you get a written those kinds of things. So I will make a note for our student handbook.
Oh, and by the way, Amanda comes from HR, so that's why like
Yes.
our handbook was very much, it needs to cover these basic things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think it will be a very important component because we will have handbook for staff, but not student, and then expect them to perform miracles. And as even as far as time management goes, you hire a student to work on a project, they're supposed to work 20 hours a week. How do you even track that? Uh, how do you make sure that they are doing the 20 hours and not doing more than they should be doing? And where should they be even doing that?
Mm.
So those are some of the questions. And unfortunately, at our institution, we talk about hiring students, but we don't think about how can we help the students succeed while they do the work. How
Mm.
can we even create an environment that can help them succeed, both as student and as a student worker? We don't have that.
Well, HR Amanda would say you begin with great defined expectations, but to be real honest with you, we don't always do that. But what we do that I think we do a great job of is in the interview, at least for the Envision Center, on their we have an onboarding meeting for an hour on their very first day where we go over the handbook, kind of where to find all the documents they need, just kind of an overview of all the important stuff. And we reiterate this pretty often that number one priority is their health. Then it's school, and then it's us. And it's reiterated often. And yeah, just I'm trying to think of anything else we have.
Yeah, but I also noticed like during COVID, I think you implemented a really nice program that if people didn't feel comfortable coming in, they could submit like that time off thing, you know, where you have like,
Oh, we do have a time off
yeah,
Qualtrics survey.
yeah.
I came in at the tail end of COVID, so I didn't realize that was implemented for that
Okay.
reason, but we
Okay.
still do use that. And yeah, often, and we even tell them, like, if you have an exam or something and you need to study more, just let us know. And they fill out that Qualtrics survey and we excuse it.
But the culture around that is it's just assumed that these things happen, right? That's why I guess
Oh,
what I
yeah.
was trying to like you make it very much of this is what happens. We support you. We
Mhm.
let the students, you know, have the time when they need the time. I think your organization does a really good job with that.
I agree.
Yeah. If
That
you
would be
want to add
George.
more, yeah. Yeah. If you want to add more to that question, I probably did not do a good job representing Purdue on that one. Okay. Ryan, I think you're next.
Okay, so then what should a student program provide to help part-time students to maintain a good balance between academic, employment, and personal life? You know, and again, just I've already kind of touched on most of this, but you know, the personal life, all you can do is encourage them. You know, it's not really something we get into a conversation on, but we do spend a lot of time with the student lead, student mentor kind of triangle, asking questions about how they're doing, you know, with their school load, how it's fitting in with the student. We very much take the approach of your student first and foremost, and our employee second. So we really do try to have them have shape our hours that we get out of them around what they're available for. That's really proven to be one of, I think, the selling points for, you know, retaining the people is we have that flexibility, but that also fits with the roles that we're using them on where there's not really a fixed shift kind of notion to that. It's more come in when you can, you know, put in the hours you can, vanish, and then come back as necessary. So I don't know, what are others, you know, doing to or aspiring to do to try to set the stage well for their students?
we have them decide their set schedules, and we have an Outlook calendar that we use in the Envision Center specifically because we have like I think 18 students right now. So in order to be able to kind of wrangle and know when people are here, we just have to have that. And like I said, we emphasize like number one is their health, number two is school, and then number three is work with us. And then following up with them on their, we do, I think twice a year, we do performance kind of check-ins. Well, one's formalized and it's coming up, but November, October, sometime we do kind of just to sit down. We ask them too how they feel things are going, not just telling them this is what we think. And I've just started like personally supervising some students, and I've been meaning to do one-on-ones, like weekly one-on-ones or bi-weekly one-on-ones, but I need to set those up still personally so that I can check in on how they're doing.
What else do others do?
I'll say we could be doing more, so I'm definitely listening carefully to what you're all saying. We definitely try to be very flexible. So if we let them take time off during school breaks, during exams, things like that. I know some of the other student jobs don't. Like, I know our swimming pool hires lifeguards. It's one of the major jobs on campus, and they are very strict. Like, there has to be coverage. If you can't make it, you have to find another student to fill in, so the pool doesn't have to close. And we have the ability to be much more flexible. So like, they get a lot of flexibility in their hours. I mean, some of them are more fixed, like the ones who answer tickets. I know when I was supervising one of them, I was clear that she needed at least the vast majority of her hours to be between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, partly because that's when we provide support, and partly because that's when I'm there. If the students have questions and need help, that I'm not going to be answering their questions at 10 o'clock at night if they're working. Some of the others, I know some of the ones working on documentation, we've gotten a little bit lax, and I see them working at 2 a.m. completely voluntarily, not because we tell them to, just to be clear, because sometimes that's when students are awake and it's convenient for their schedules. But we do have fixed meetings twice a week with our students, with their mentor to check in and see how they're doing, answer any questions, make sure that they're not stuck on something, and try to have at least a decent overlap in hours so that they can ask questions if something comes up during the week. And as far as overall health, I think while we say all the things you said about prioritizing their health, their work, all that, we probably don't make it clear enough. And we could definitely implement that more effectively, I think, to make sure that that's always clear for the students.
That's good feedback. Yeah. I guess when we started the meeting today, we should have said we will send this out to everyone as a reminder of the folks that weren't here, so we can get everyone to fill in these questions. And then, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. So then after that, what our intention is to take things that are actionable and start providing them as artifacts. So like one thing, Amanda, we could definitely do is do a round of who has student handbooks and can we share them among the community. But definitely some of the answers that we've gotten from the first meeting and then this meeting I think we found a lot of really good actionable, we can share this with the broader community. And then of course, I'm always about writing papers. I said, this is like a paper that could write itself for PERC or a different conference that we should definitely just move forward with. And we'll probably ask the community who would like to participate in that kind of stuff. But we're really looking for trying to get some producible things out of this.
Yeah.
Jumping to the next one. So as we finish, if you don't get an opportunity to answer all of them, if you want to just take the time after, that would be great. But the next question is, what issues or challenges have you run into with your student workers and or your student program? And one of the big things that hit home for me, and Amanda, I'd really love for you to add onto this, but one of the big things that I think hit home for most people is you have the student on deck, but you don't have a project available. And so like the student sits there idly. We'd had students come, and I don't know when, and the mentor wasn't quite prepared, didn't have a project ready. And so then the student sits there for a week or two or whatever, and they get a little disenchanted. On the other hand, we have so much work. The other thing where this sort of falls down is that we have so much work and the mentor doesn't have the cycles to work with the student, and then it starts to fall apart. But are there other things that the team, that everyone on the call is seeing, that become pretty problematic pretty quick that we could add here?
I highlighted in my answer on this one, getting the students with the background you want. That's always been a challenge, right? So in some ways, I'll say, how do we address that? We changed some of our expectations. To me, the dream student is the person who's at home building their gaming rig and has dabbled with Linux, maybe has a Raspberry Pi and has been writing some Python code. If I could find that repeatability, with some sustainability, I'd be set, because they built their gaming rig, so the hardware I've got should be somewhat interesting. The Linux and the programming are just gonna, round out the usage side of things and give them some wherewith to get started, kind of understanding the environment. But we haven't. So again, as I said, we've changed our expectations. We focus more now on somebody who seems genuinely interested, and the skill and experience is bonus. We're looking for somebody that we can come in, because honestly, we can teach the skill if they'll stick with us. And I just want to do a better job of judging whether or not they seem like this is going to be an interesting, thing for them to do. So we spend a little bit of time with them on that. I see the retention has been a bit of an issue. We've addressed that a little bit, just on the having them help define projects of things they can make the things they consider annoying to do better, and then you turn them loose, empower them, to make it better. And in some cases we've had where we've gone and bumped their rate up to retain them because they were worth retaining. Although that took a little effort to get approved. So that's what
Yeah. Brian, I think you hit on something that other parts of Purdue IT is seeing, that wage inequities. So like one organization, our organization, research computing, paid quite a bit more than the central IT. So like, to Claire's point, retaining good students, like it was a revolving door for a while for some of these organizations. And then if I wasn't ahead of whatever everyone else was paying on campus, I would, to Claire's point, you'd get a really great student and then they're gone because they need to live, they need money, and they'll take the highest paying job. So I think that is also, large universities I think are going to face that problem.
We do have the problem of not having enough projects, sometimes, depending on the type of student work. With some of our students, we're able to give them back burner projects. So our artists right now, we don't have a whole lot of work for, but one of our student artists is learning photogrammetry.
Oh.
And then we have another one that we have a motion capture system here. So one of our students is kind of our subject matter expert in that. And so we just set them loose in learning all of that and let them just kind of play with it. So that has helped. They still are a little short on a few things, but it just, cycles of when things are busy are hard to predict. So I will say we're trying to get some better project management practices in general, and estimating our costs. But for us, that's hard because of the students being so temporary in some roles, and some of our students only work 10 hours a week as well. So kind of hard to plan when you only have 10 hours to work with.
Yeah, for sure.
Not really as a question I'm asking anybody specifically, but we've gone through some of the issues of not enough work for people to do. And I'd say maybe organically we've evolved to the point now where if somebody wants a student, they kind of need to know what they need them for. We're not filling a position then trying to work for the position. We're addressing some kind of a need. So, for me with the clusters and the node wrangling, that's a pretty easy thing to define what I want out of this and what it does for me, the full-time person, if they're doing their job well. But there's been a few efforts we've done where we've had like a box node or something like that, where we encourage any of the FTE staff to go in and throw project ideas in, things that they would love to have a student do. And I will say that turns into some craziness, because there's some people who think they're asking for a tiny thing and it's not a tiny thing. So it really hasn't stuck well. In the end, we've had more success because I keep looking to the left here because there's a pile of Post-it notes over here that are just little thoughts or ideas that came up, in a meeting with somebody else where I noted it down. And so when somebody says I got nothing to do, I just start digging through this pile. Sometimes some of the things are now out of date. They're not relevant anymore. Sometimes they're still good stuff. So we've done reasonably well with that, but I think we've all talked about trying to do better, curate a list and try to encourage more, department-wide community suggestions, but that's an area I think we could do better, but yeah.
We have a form for the mentors to fill out to submit. And that way they have to kind of speak to what, actually, I think Betsy started it. So they have to speak to what they need the student for. And then I know recently a big piece of why we really want them to do that is so that we can propose that for other students. And if they have that skill set, to have them work on that. So yeah.
I
Go ahead.
I think we also want to make sure that you actually, like you say, curate that list of what people ask for, because you just don't want them to create this list of stuff they don't want to do. Right? The dirty work, and make it a laundry list of just nasty stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you find this, the starving student really doesn't exist anymore, I think. I mean, they're financially strapped, but it's not the same thing as 30, 40, 50 years ago, where you would do anything because you just needed the money to pay your tuition or your fees or whatever, right?
Right.
These students tend to be more discerning about that they want something that actually adds to their resume, for example. Right. So I think that addresses kind of that previous question about the balance, right? Academic, personal life. You really have to entice them a little bit. It's not just like it used to be. Student workers were just like, oh yeah, they just do what you tell them to do. But you really, in order to keep them, they really are they're a junior employee.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I used to think like, what a bunch of entitled, what? And then I was like, well, I guess like,
right.
Who's the dumb one here, me or them? Like,
yeah,
and I'm finding like our positions here in the Envision Center are really coveted, but our students are real, like the go-getters are wanting internships that diversify their skills. It's not just enough to have them, because a lot of our students go to like gaming studios and build games. So they like really need to, it's competitive. So they really need to show that they have all this experience. So we lose a lot of summer help because of that, because they want these cool internships.
Brian, it sounds like kind of that's what your program does, is you give them that foundational training almost, that then they go away and then they can do those great internships during the summer and come back to you.
Yeah, there's two things I'd add. Claire's is one. So we do let students move around within our own department. They can come in as a node wrangler and see stuff going on in the monitoring group, and I want to do that. and it just naturally starts happening. And then I'm filling a node wrangler spot again. So we do let people slide around. The other one is we see it as a success when our students get an internship and have to vanish for, summer or whenever, because often they're letting us know that they were told that part of the reason they got that internship was the experience they got from us. And we try to keep a very positive outlook on that, and then let them know the door is open as soon as they're back. Sometimes they don't come back, but we've had a pretty high success rate of getting them to come back. And there's a few of them who have gone on summer internships every summer. So again, it's just us kind of balancing our summer expectations. And occasionally this is where we're training up a new person. Yeah, it's worked out reasonably well. The internships really have not been a negative, other than I think up front worrying that that meant they weren't coming back. But yeah, it's happened a bit, but not too much. So we lost Betsy.
Yeah.
We did.
So maybe we should wrap up unless there's some other comments. We didn't quite get through everything, but we're not far from it. So again, we'll send the doc out to everybody in the list and encourage people to fill out the sections that they maybe hadn't made it to, and for those who didn't make it to today. So I don't know, any other closing thoughts? No. Let's call this good then. Thanks.
Okay. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.